Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor of ClassicsToday.com, and today we're taking on Bach's Brandenburg Concertos, the 6 concertos that he theoretically wrote for the Margrave of Brandenburg as a sort of job resume to see if he could get hired by that court to be their court composer. And he failed. The Margrave of Brandenburg didn't give a damn, which I think is really kind of amusing, actually. And it may be because he didn't give a damn that the presentation copy of the manuscript survived. It's really kind of handy that we had it because Bach made it. And like so many things, if he hadn't made a nice, neat copy, we might not know that these pieces even existed. Now, the reason that these are so important, historically, is because Bach did not write a lot of instrumental or orchestral music. He wrote tons of keyboard music and organ music, and there's chamber music and whatnot. But that kind of music was considered disposable. Bach's cantatas were considered disposable. Unless you published it yourself or did something to preserve it, it was all disposable. So these are extremely important for our understanding of Bach's writing for the orchestra. Now, I have to confess something. I am not a Bach fan. I'm really not. You have to respect Bach. I respect Bach. There are some pieces by Bach that I love, but most of the time I just don't. I find him somewhat heavy-handed, kind of pedantic. He was one of those encyclopedic geniuses who everything he did had to do everything all the time, so that, the 6 Brandenburg concertos are sort of like everything you can do with a concerto, or everything he could do with a concerto, just like the Well-Tempered Clavier is, preludes and fugues in all of the major and minor keys. And the Art of Fugue is everything you can do with a fugue. And the B minor Mass is everything you can do with a chorus. And, that was his genius. And God knows it's an admirable aspect of his genius, but I find the musical results kind of tedious, personally. And I'm going to say that straight out because, you're supposed to just sort of look at Bach and say, oh, remember that MASH episode with Radar O'Reilly going, Bach, or whatever it was? There's no attempt anymore to engage with the music and say, okay, I like this, I don't like that. I love the concerto BWV 1052, the D minor keyboard concerto, because I think it's creepy and relentless and kind of fun, But, the Brandenburgs, for me, I like in spots. I like the trumpet concerto because it's, it has crazy, crazy trumpet writing. And, I like the 4th concerto for the 2 flutes. The first movement's really pretty. I love the 5th concerto because it was the world's first sort of keyboard concerto. And it has that phenomenal cadenza in the first movement. So, I like some bits more than other bits. But that's not how I look at recordings of them. The recordings are all pretty consistent. The other thing about Bach that's a great myth is that his music is difficult. It is. It can be very virtuosic and very difficult, but orchestral music in the Baroque period was very formulaic. You had a continuo in the bottom, you had teeny tiny group of string sections doing all the filler, and then you have crazy virtuoso solo parts. And there's been some very fine recent scholarship that suggests that the reason that Bach's solo writing is so difficult is because he really didn't know very well how to write for some instruments, including the brass instruments, because in Bach's day, brass players were not regular instrumentalists, regular orchestral players. What you had to do was requisition the trumpets and timpani from the armory, and which is what he did in Leipzig. They had some town trumpeters who could only play a few notes at deafening volume. And so Bach basically said, the hell with it. I'm going to write for the trumpet like I write for the violin or for the flute. And if the guy can play it, good. And if he can't, too bad. And of course, today, we have fabulous musicians who, because of this loony, difficult virtuoso writing, they've learned to play it all, on their instrument, which is pretty remarkable because it is excruciatingly difficult as far as the solo voices go. But, there have been a bazillion great performances of the Brandenburg concertos. Starting with, Busch, Adolf Busch, and the Busch chamber players. They, in the 1930s, that was when the first set of Brandenburgs was recorded. It's still very good. It really is, because the music itself plays itself. Baroque music does play itself generally, and Bach's music does too. You pick a reasonable tempo that allows for decent polyphonic clarity, and The tempo almost never changes within a movement. It's very motoric and rigid rhythmically. And then you just let it go, and it goes. So we have like a billion different recordings of the Brandenburg Concertos, all of which are very good, all of which I've enjoyed at one point or another. And I'm just going to tell you what they are, and you can decide for yourself which one you want. I mean, you can do them on original instruments, you can do them on modern instruments, you can do them on in transcription. They've been done, and Bach's music also. There's a funny thing about Bach, a fascinating thing, is that his music is so solid from every angle that it works no matter how you do it. I mean, Bach transcribed everything all over the place for everything else. I mean, you could play it underwater, you could play it in outer space, you could play it in the bathroom. It doesn't make any difference. It's going to sound good because of the way that it has such musical fundamentals that are so solid all the way through. And that's another aspect of his genius. But there are 6 concertos here, and let's just go through them and see what they're written for, because it's very interesting. I'm looking at the booklet here for the performance on Lynn Records with the Dunedin Consort under John Butt, which is a light and lively period instrument performance, which is quite virtuosic. People will argue back and forth about the virtues of this versus that recording, but it's all just a question of personal preference in terms of sonority. It really is. I have my preferences, which we'll discuss. You will have yours. And I think that's really what it's all about. The performances themselves are going to be almost invariably fine. There's not a lot of room for interpretation in this music. There really isn't. So anyway, the first concerto is written for, get this, 2 hunting horns, corni da caccia, 3 oboes, a bassoon, and a violino piccolo concertato. That's a little violin thing, sort of, whatever that is. Number 2 is for a trumpet, as you know, a flute, an oboe, and a violin and orchestra. Number 3 is simply for 9-part strings, which is actually quite fascinating in what Bach does with them, because you have 9-part strings, and that's all it is. There aren't any real solos, but each string section, that is the violins, the violas, and the cellos, at one point or another becomes a solo. So it's a concerto for orchestra in a sense. It's highly polyphonic, and the third concerto has an issue in that it only has 2 movements, and so there's a question about what happens in the middle, because Bach puts 2 chords sort of linking them, which clearly suggests that there should be some sort of cadenza or something improvised in the middle, and different performances handle it differently. Some do nothing and just play what Bach wrote. Some have a very short linking bridge passage for some solo instruments here and there. Either way, it works fine. Number 4 is for a violin and 2 flauti di eco. Now that's interesting. No one knows what a flauto di eco is. It may refer to how the flutes are treated. Nicholas Harnoncourt thought it referred to the slow movement, to the writing for the flutes. It's anybody's guess. Basically, usually in flauti in Bach's day were recorders, because the flutes that we know them were transverse flutes. That is flauto traverso, the ones that we hold like this, as opposed to recorders like that. I like the 4th concerto a lot because the fugal finale is really brilliant, and it just has do 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 do. It's just very catchy. It's got a great tune. The 5th is also great because it's essentially a keyboard concerto. It's written for 1 transverse flute, which they call a traversière, a violin, and a cembalo, that is harpsichord, or piano in modern performances, where it has this enormous cadenza in the first movement. And that really actually is one of the few places in all of the Brandenburg concertos where the interpretation really matters. I mean, it really, really matters, because you can have, it can be destroyed by a demented cadenza, as, for example, Furtwängler's live recordings of the 5th, where he goes on a Zen-like meditative coma and sort of drifts dreamily through the cadenza. Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible in ways I can't even begin to describe. Furtwängler fans love it. They show him being philosophical. It's It's horrible. But it's an incredibly exciting and virtuoso moment. We'll talk about the cadenza a little bit because my favorite versions have a sensational cadenza in the fifth concerto. And then the sixth is for, well, it's for gambas, sort of. It's all for low instruments, viola da braccio, which is an arm viol, and sort of thing, and a viola da gamba, which was the sort of forerunner of the cello, and then a couple cellos. So it's all for low instruments, and it can sound quite muddy. Period instrument performances have actually helped in clarifying the texture in this music. One of the things about the sixth concerto, which is sort of the least popular because it's kind of dark and dingy sounding, has always been, I don't know. Have you ever heard of viola da gamba? It kind of sounds like a dying cow. It really does. It just goes, if you play all that French viol music, and it's a horrible sounding instrument. No wonder it was replaced by the cellos. It's a good reason it was replaced by the cellos. But anyway, so I'm putting this little booklet thing here away, and doing it in consort on Lynn under John Butt. Very good performances. There are so many. But first, I'm going to talk about a couple on modern instruments. Remember I mentioned, that the Bush chamber players did it in 1938. Lots of people did this. I mean, Kusevitsky did the Brandenburgs. Fritz Reiner did the Brandenburgs. All in mono. There's nothing wrong with any of these historical performances. I mean, some of them use, saxophone in place of the trumpet. They replace instruments. But the point about Bach is that it never matters. You can do anything you want, switch it around. The only thing I don't like, I have to say, is that some period instrument versions, Hogwood's, for example, play earlier versions of the concertos. In other words, the fifth concerto in an earlier version before it had the cadenza. I mean, what's the point? If it doesn't have the cadenza, who cares, right? Or the first concerto, missing some bits it has four movements. And the last movement is a minuet with lots of little trios, including a cute little woodwind polonaise. And, there are different versions of these things because Bach reused them in cantatas and other ways. And so we can reconstruct them, in their earlier forms. I don't go for that. I don't find it interesting. I think that when a person like Bach bothers to perfect a work and present it in what he considered to be an ideal form, who are we to question that? I think as the Brandenburg concertos, that is, you want to play the other works that contain the same music, go ahead, that's fine. But the Brandenburg concertos are the Brandenburg concertos as presented to the Margrave of Brandenburg, and that's how we should hear them, or at least as close as possible. So I want to just talk about a couple modern recordings, which are kind of fun. Charles Munch with the Boston Symphony. I have a great affection for this set because, first of all, it's Munch. And Munch, was a major Bach guy. He was very friendly with Albert Schweitzer. He was from Strasbourg. He had that German. He started his career in the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra. People don't realize just how Bach-oriented Munch was because he was always doing Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe and French music and Berlioz. But he was a Bach guy. He desperately wanted to make a recording of the St. Matthew Passion. He never got a chance. It would have been, of course, hopelessly anachronistic, but there's no question that he had the feeling for the music, right? And this has, in the fifth concerto, it's for piano, not harpsichord, with Lucas Foss playing the piano part, as he did for Kusevitsky when Kusevitsky did his set with the Boston Symphony. So I just have a lot of affection for this set generally. And it's beautifully played, and it's, maybe a little heavy-handed or slow or, by modern standards, but I don't care. And neither should you. Next, a sort of more modern period instrument, modern version, Chailly with the Gewandhaus, on Decca. Now, the Gewandhaus was Bach's hometown team, as it were, right? And so there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't hear the hometown team play their music by their hometown boy, Mr. Bach. It's a very, very good performance. They're lively, they're vital, and like I said, there's just nothing to interpret here. There's not much anyway, aside from the cadenza in the fifth concerto. You just wind it up and let it go. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about interpretive options, but those interpretive options that you're going to hear, because all the rest of these performances, no, except for one, our period instrument, the one that is not, is I Musici. This is the I Musici set that has everything, every famous human being playing Baroque music at the time, all on one disc. I mean, you've got like Heinz Holliger playing the oboe and Pina Carmirelli playing the violino piccolo. And I mean, these are all really like major famous people. And it's absolutely beautiful. I mean, I Musici deserves a big box set of its own. Philips, Decca, whoever you are. And this was sort of the deluxe I Musici Brandenburg set. And it's wonderful. I mean, it's just absolutely wonderful. Cultivated, beautiful playing, warm, sonorous singing, some sensible vibrato so that the string tone doesn't sound all glassy and shrill. It's lovely. Now, all the rest of these are period instruments, one way or another. I'm like sitting on piles of them. It's like unbelievable. And we're going to go through them rather quickly because, like I said, there's not a lot to talk about in terms of interpretation. So, first of all, you have to represent the English school, which we have here. Wait a minute. Yeah, the English school of Bach performance. Here it is, Trevor Pinnock. I mean, he did all this Bach stuff. Sounds great. Next, let's do the Japanese school. Suzuki, the Japan Bach Collegium. You know, he's doing all the cantatas on bis. He's done lots of Bach. It sounds like Bach. Next. Oh, yes. Musica Antigua Köln, Reinhard Goebel. Now, here we have to talk about interpretation a little bit because these guys were, you know, sort of the initiators of the Hannibal Lecter school of Baroque performance practice. In other words, it's slash and burn, hacking and chopping. It's very exciting. The tempi are really fast. The accents are really ferocious. The tone is kind of rough sometimes. Lots of people really found this very exciting. And in the same vein, you have Il Giardino Armonico in Italy, because, you know, they also do the Hannibal Lecter school of Vivaldi performance, you know, that slash and burn serial killer style of playing Baroque music. And again, very quick, very exciting, and very well recorded, and that's that. Now let us come to the performances that I tend to enjoy most. My own personal preference, and it's purely personal. It really is. Look, I think there are a couple things that matter in performances of these works that I really want to hear. First, bass lines. Bach's bass lines are really important. You want to hear a depth of texture. Even though these orchestral parts aren't particularly exciting often, I like to hear some attention given to the bass lines so that the music has that kind of firmness and solidity that Bach has anyway. But you know, it makes it sound like there's more interesting things happening than just sort of noodling up on the top. That's number one. Number two, I like a slightly darker sonority. I tend to prefer, again, something that's not bass-oriented. I want to hear richness on the inner parts. I mean, I want to hear it, you know, sound like it's an orchestra. And, you know, certain period instrument performances do that. I have to say, the English school, generally, I find kind of harsh and bright and steely and not very rich from the top down. So I don't like it as much. You know, it's excellent playing of its kind. You understand? But it's not my preference in this music. My preference runs to, well, here are three, and then I'll give you my ultimate. Florilegium on Channel Classics, Dutch ensemble, a little bit darker in sonority, maybe a little bit more relaxed in phrasing and tempo. I mean, I like when music is highly polyphonic as Bach's is. I don't think you should play it so fast. I think you should have time to allow the ear, you know, to capture what's going on, to you know, revel in the interplay of the various lines and forces. But this is just sonically a knockout. I mean, it's a fabulous recording, technically, and the performances are absolutely gorgeous. Florilegium is a sensational group, so that's a good one. Also, this set on Alpha with Café Zimmermann. Zimmermann's Coffee House was where Bach and his Collegium Musicum used to meet and perform his keyboard concertos and other things. And so that's what this group is named after. And they're a wonderful group. There's a real joy in their music making, I think, that comes through. It's palpable. And this contains all of Bach's concertos, including the Brandenburgs, the volumes 1 through 6 of Concerts avec plusieurs instruments. That means all the Bach concertos that they could do. And here they are on Alpha at a very good price, by the way. It's a terrific set, an absolutely terrific set, and a joy from first note to last. Then, I've always loved the set. This is Jordi Savall. Savall with Le Concert des Nations. Savall is a gamba player. That is, he plays the dying cow. And much as I loathe gamba music generally, I love these performances because they are sort of directed toward the lower end of the sonic spectrum, and they have tremendous richness, and the sonics help too. They're given a nice resonant recording. It's a beautiful set. Savall is a wonderful musician. I haven't had a chance to talk about him too much yet. I really will talk more about him because he's made stunning recordings, and this is a beautiful, beautiful disc of the Brandenburgs. However, my favorite Brandenburgs, well, I had two. One isn't around anymore. It wasn't on CD. It was the Linde Consort with Hans Martin Linde. He was like a recorder player, and he made an early EMI digital set, which some of you may remember, which I thought was beautiful. It was a revelation to me, frankly, about what the Brandenburgs could sound like. But he's not around. However, this guy who's still around is Leonhardt, good old Leonhardt. Oh, I love these performances. This is on Vivarte, but these were originally Sion recordings, I believe. Now that Sony and BMG own all of that whole universe, they've all been collected. This, in various ways. This also contains. Remember, I did a video about the best Bach keyboard concerto in D minor, BWV 1052, with the CPE Bach D minor concerto. That's in this box too. But the thing about this is that the performers are like everybody in the world who later had an independent career because they were all trained by Leonhardt. You've got the Kuiken brothers, Sigiswald and Wieland Kuiken. They're kind of like the Wayans brothers of Baroque music, if you want to call them that. Sigiswald, I don't know how to pronounce it. He plays the Baroque violino piccolo, and Wieland plays the cello. And you've got Anna Bilsma playing the cello, and you've got Franz Bruggen playing the recorder. I mean, it's incredible. Bob Van Asperen is one of the harpsichord guys. It's a who's who of the entire period instrument movement. There's Lucy Van Dale, who also plays the Baroque violin. I mean, you just can't find a more wonderful and collegial group of people playing these concertos. And that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a family, like the Bach family. Like, that's what they are. They're the Bach family of period instrument performances. And they do these Brandenburgs so beautifully. And the best thing about it is that Leonhardt leads from the harpsichord and turns in a performance of the cadenza in the fifth concerto that I think has never been equaled. It is so fabulously well shaped. It has structure and point and virtuosity and verve and oh God, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. And I'm saying all this about music that's never really thrilled me, but these performances thrill me. And that's what you can say about, great music making. Even if, Bach isn't your favorite composer, and it's okay if he's not your favorite composer, and this isn't your favorite music, which is true of me in both cases, you can only sit back and wallow in musical intelligence and virtuosity and performing, genius of that order. There's just no point in criticizing it. If you don't want to like it, don't like it. But performance is just phenomenal. And so my recommendation for the Brandenburgs is Leonhardt with the dream team of Baroque period instrument performers. I really think that they illuminate these wonderful pieces from every angle and give you your best option. But like I said, any of these will do you proud. They're all wonderful performances of music that has been played with incredible sympathy and imagination and respect and verve and virtuosity and all of those qualities since the 1930s, since the early days of recordings. So take your pick and go at the Brandenburgs. Thank you very much, folks. Keep on listening.